Howdy folks, Rob here from Winging It Weekly, your new, hopefully go-to spot for mysteries, history, crime, science, and politics. Today, we're diving into one of the most interesting figures in American history, John F. Kennedy. We'll explore his early years, what led him into politics, his presidency, and of course, that tragic day in Dallas. Plus, we'll break down some of the latest declassified files and what they reveal. So stay tuned, grab some drinks, some food, and buckle up. This is going to be a wild ride. John F. Kennedy's story begins within the powerful yet complicated Kennedy dynasty. Born in 1917 to Joseph and Rose Kennedy, he was raised in a family driven by ambition, competition, and the relentless pursuit of success. His father, Joe Sr., had a vision. He wanted his sons to reach the pinnacle of power, to become the President of the United States. The presidency was the ultimate prize, and from an early age, the Kennedy children were shaped by this expectation. A good example is when Joe Jr. would schedule a mandatory meetup in the dining table at 7:30 for dinner and force every one of his kids to debate about a current topic. Jack's older brother, Joe Jr., was the family's prodigy son, the one groomed for greatness, athletic, good grades, good looks, and he was popular. He got into Harvard University and cruised into Harvard Law School afterwards, destined for greatness. Joe Jr. symbolized everything his father wanted, and Jack was not. Growing up, Jack and Joe Jr. were in constant competition, whether fighting for their father's approval or a natural sibling rivalry. No one can really say for sure. Robert F. Kennedy even had a distinct memory of being a little kid, afraid because he would witness his older brothers in an all-out brawl. Growing up, Jack struggled with chronic illness. He suffered from Addison's disease, a rare and debilitating endocrine disorder, leaving him often overlooked by his father. Joe Sr. saw Jack as frail, weak, and undisciplined, but Jack wanted to carve his own future, regardless of what his father said, and that was his motto for his entire life. Jack was rebellious, and his grades were mediocre at best, only excelling in English and history. Jack had this gang of 12 friends called the Muckers that would do pranks in Canterbury, the boarding school he attended, where most students found themselves getting expelled for being menaces and pranksters, and Jack found himself being saved by his father. And once Jack graduated, he only got into Harvard because of who his father was. Not to forget, Jack always bragged about his ability to raise up women to his friends, even more so than his older brother. But to be fair, Joe Jr. was on that Sigma Mill grindset and didn't have time for the baddies. Anyways, now that the ones with brain rot up to speed, let's continue. But I do recommend those with brain rot to use their fidget spinner because I hate myself for saying all that. At Harvard, Jack was still a mediocre student, again at best, and was interested in seeing how many women he can sleep with rather than his classes. But everything came to a halt. On September 1st, 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland, and Jack's interest became that of the war, and even created the thesis that later became a book called Why England Slept. He was criticizing England for their mistakes leading him to World War II and warning America to not make the same mistakes. Jack's grades are starting to improve once in government, but it was only B's, which, it's still improving for him, and he graduated Harvard University as a mediocre student. But at least he created a book, even though he hired someone to type for him, but it is his work. Can't waste his time typing when he can pay someone for that. Man, I can't wait to be rich. Everyone's lives changed in America once the Jap surprise attacked us on Pearl Harbor, and the Kennedys were no exception to this change. Joe Jr. paused his studies in Harvard Law and joined the Navy, becoming a recognized pilot. And Jack wanted to follow his footsteps, but Jack really didn't meet the standards because of his poor health. But with his father's influence, he secured a role in World War II, commanding a PT boat, which is a small, agile boat that carries torpedoes and launches them at larger ships. It's meant to counter the slower and bigger boats, but it's extremely dangerous and so many things can go wrong all at once. And he was stationed in the Pacific. This was controversial because he was only awarded this position because of his last name, but Jack wanted so desperately to go to war, only to instantly regret it, seeing things he wished he'd never seen. His leadership was tested when his boat, PT-109, got rammed by a Japanese destroyer called the Imagiri, split in half, instantly killing 2 of his men and leaving the rest stranded in hostile waters. Despite being in agonizing back pain, Jack swam miles through the dark ocean, towing an injured crewman to safety with the life vest strap clenched between his teeth. Stranded on a remote island, he kept his men alive until they were rescued, and his heroism earned him awards such as the Purple Heart and many, many more. Joe Jr., stationed in England at the time, watched as his younger brother became a war hero. Perhaps he felt proud, perhaps jealousy. What is certain though is that he refused to be overshadowed. Despite completing the required number of missions to return home, Joe Jr. volunteered for one last highly dangerous mission, an experimental flight loaded with explosives, and before boarding, he told a fellow officer, "If I don't make it back, tell my father I love him." He never returned. His plane exploded midair over the English Channel, killing him instantly. Many say that his death was his own fault. He could have easily gone home to his family, but refused once he heard about Jack's heroism and his awards. With Joe Jr. gone, the torch was passed. The son once seen as weak, the boy who spent his childhood in hospitals, was now Kennedy's heir, and Jack's journey to the presidency had just begun. His military valor, charisma, and political savvy propelled him into Congress, followed by a seat in the U.S. Senate, but also being very wealthy played a giant role in his victories and his campaigns. As the saying goes, you need three things to win an election: money, money, and money. The 1960 election was a turning point in American politics. His campaign slogan, "A New Frontier," resonated with a generation eager for change, and Jack also had a secret weapon, his very own Tywin Lannister, his father, Joe Sr. His wealth, power, influence, and intimidation goes a long way in a world of politics, unfortunately. JFK faced Richard Nixon in the first ever televised debate, where his youthful charm and confidence outshone Nixon's tired and sweaty appearance. And during the 1960 presidential campaign, civil rights was a tough issue, but John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon wanted the African Americans vote, but they were also afraid of upsetting Southern white voters. Then something happened that changed everything. In October 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested in Georgia for leading a sit-in protest. At first, it seemed like a small offense, but then things took a dangerous turn. King was sentenced to 4 months in hard labor at a prison known for mistreating black inmates. His wife, Coretta Scott King, was terrified that he wouldn't even make it out alive. Nixon had connections with civil rights leaders, but he stayed quiet. He didn't want to risk angering his Southern supporters. At first, JFK was also hesitant, but his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, saw an opportunity. RFK made a bold move. He called the judge directly and convinced them to release King on bail. When Coretta Scott King got the news, she said, "I never thought a president would care." The Kennedy campaign spread the word, calling black pastors and sending out thousands of pamphlets. After a grueling campaign, taking risks to free MLK, facing the first ever televised debates, countless people criticizing his inexperience in Catholic faith, everything came down to November 8th, 1960. As the results gradually came in, tensions filled in JFK's war room. His team watched anxiously, knowing the race was razor thin. Rumors swirled that Joe Sr. had called in favors, but whether they made a difference or not, no one can really say for sure. The hours dragged on, and every update tightening the knot in their stomachs. Then, a sign. Secret Service agents quietly entered the building, and at that moment, they knew John F. Kennedy had won. And at 43, he was now the youngest elected president and the first Roman Catholic to hold office. The election was one of the closest in American history, with Kennedy narrowly defeating Vice President Richard Nixon. Kennedy secured 303 electoral votes to Nixon's 219, with a popular vote margin of just 0.17%. Despite allegations of election fraud in Illinois and Texas, Kennedy's victory marked a significant moment in U.S. politics. JFK's victory symbolized a new era of optimism, with his powerful inaugural address challenging Americans to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. JFK's presidency was brief, but packed with historical moments. Jack learned early on that he could not trust any intelligence agency, especially the CIA. JFK felt deeply betrayed by the CIA after the Bay of Pigs invasion because he believed they had misled him, downplayed the risks, and set him up for failure. The CIA assured him that the invasion, using Cuban exiles to overthrow Castro, would spark a popular uprising, but this was completely false. They also convinced him that the U.S. military intervention wouldn't be needed, yet when the operation failed, they expected Kennedy to cave and send troops. He refused, unwilling to escalate into a full-scale war, leaving the invasion force stranded and resulting in a humiliating defeat. The disaster made Kennedy look weak on the world stage, and instead of admitting their intelligence failures, the CIA let him take the blame. Kennedy was furious, and he forced CIA Director Allen Dulles to resign, and later told aides he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. This betrayal shaped his deep mistrust of the intelligence community, influencing his future decisions, especially during the Cuban Missile Crisis. After the failed invasion, Fidel Castro sought stronger Soviet support, leading Nikita Khrushchev to place nuclear missiles in Cuba to deter future U.S. aggression. When U.S. reconnaissance flights discovered the missiles in 1962, many military leaders pushed for an immediate airstrike and invasion, but Kennedy, having learned from CIA's deception during the Bay of Pigs, refused to be pressured into another reckless military action. Instead, he imposed a naval blockade, forcing a tense standoff with the Soviet Union. In a secret back-channel deal, he agreed to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey in exchange for the Soviet withdrawal from Cuba, successfully defusing the crisis. This decision frustrated hardliners of the CIA and Pentagon, who had wanted war. At home, Kennedy championed civil rights, though carefully. He initially hesitated to anger the Southern Democrats because of his upcoming election, but ultimately declared civil rights a moral issue, sending federal troops to desegregate the University of Mississippi and supporting Martin Luther King Jr. His administration also set the stage for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Perhaps his boldest vision was the space race. He was determined to beat the Soviets, and he declared, "We choose to go to the moon." His leadership revitalized NASA, paving the way for the 1969 moon landing. November 22nd, 1963. It started like any other day. JFK and Jackie arrived in Dallas for a political visit. Jack was worried that he wasn't pleasing his southern voters, but he was greeted by thousands of enthusiastic supporters to silence his worries. And as their motorcade rolled through Dealey Plaza, gunfire shattered the optimism of the Kennedy era and changed history forever. JFK was struck twice, with a fatal shot blowing the right side of his head. Chaos ensued as the Secret Service agents rushed to Parkland Hospital, where doctors fought to save him. But at 1 p.m., America lost its 35th president, ending the Camelot era. Lee Harvey Oswald was quickly arrested but never had his day in court. 2 days later, a nightclub owner, Jack Ruby, assassinated Oswald on live television, sparking decades of conspiracy theories. Was Oswald a lone gunman, or was he a pawn in a larger plot involving the CIA, Mafia, Cuba, and/or Russia? One of the most popular conspiracy theories is that of the CIA and the military leaders wanted Kennedy dead because he had become a liability. After the Bay of Pigs invasion, JFK fired CIA Director Allen Dulles and vowed to shatter the agency into 1,000 pieces. His refusal to invade Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis also infuriated the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who saw him as weak. Some believe Operation Northwoods, a declassified plan where the Pentagon suggested staging attacks to justify war, proves they were capable of extreme actions. Oswald's connection to intelligence agencies, including his mysterious trip to Mexico City, where he allegedly met with the Soviet and Cuban officials, further fuel this theory. RFK Jr., RFK's third son, and the current head of the Department of Health, strongly believes in this theory as well. Another theory suggests that Kennedy's own vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, played a role in his assassination. JFK had planned to drop LBJ from the 1964 ticket, and Johnson was facing scandals that could have ended his career. Many believe Johnson's close ties to Texas oil tycoons, the military-industrial complex, and the powerful political figures gave him both the motive and the connections to orchestrate this hit. LBJ's longtime associate, Billy Solestes, later claimed Johnson was behind the murder, pointing to CIA-backed elements in Texas as the real killers. One of the biggest flaws in the official story is the magic bullet theory, which claims that one bullet fired from Oswald's rifle caused 7 wounds in both JFK and Texas Governor John Connally. Many experts argue this is physically impossible, leading to speculation about a second shooter. Witnesses reporting here are shots from the grassy knoll, and this uploaded film appears to show Kennedy being hit from the front, not just from Oswald's position at the Texas School Book Depository. The House Select Committee on Assassinations even concluded in 1979 that JFK was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. Given the Cold War tensions, some believe the Soviet Union, or Fidel Castro, had Kennedy assassinated in retaliation for CIA attempts to overthrow or kill Castro. Oswald, a former Marine, defected to the Soviet Union in 1959, married a Russian woman, and later tried to secure a visa to Cuba. While there's no hard evidence linking Castro or Khrushchev to the assassination, the idea that Oswald had foreign handlers remained a chilling possibility. For decades, classified documents kept the truth out of public reach. The Warren Commission concluded Oswald acted alone, but skepticism never faded. The CIA tracked Oswald before the assassination, but claimed ignorance of his plans, raising questions about whether he was being watched, used, or set up. Soviet intelligence also had its suspicions. According to a former KGB agent, Nikonov, the USSR did not really see Oswald as a credible asset. They viewed him as unstable, unreliable, and a terrible shot, hardly the kind of assassin capable of pulling off such a precise and historic killing. The Soviets believed Oswald was being used as a pawn in a much larger operation, possibly orchestrated by the forces within the US government itself. While the files do give out plenty of information, I just can't help the feeling that I have more questions than answers. JFK's assassination robbed America of a leader who embodied hope, ambition, and the promise of a better future. His vision shaped the course of history, advancing civil rights, igniting the space race, and redefining Cold War diplomacy. But his death left behind more than just grief. It left a trail of unanswered questions, whispered conspiracies, and a lingering sense of injustice.